Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 52. In this week's episode, we're going to talk more about Arrow Lake and some of the launch stuff, testing of motherboards. We're going to talk about how social media is kind of crappy these days and what's happening there and some of the feedback to our videos and comments and things like that. We're going to talk about this weird burnt up 9800X3D that we've seen on Reddit and some potential causes just based on analyzing the couple of images that we've seen, and plenty of boring life stuff in this episode as well. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, let's get into it. We're back, Steve, for another podcast. I've just finished up this week booking I shouldn't say our CES plans because you're actually not coming to CES.
Yeah, I'm not invited.
It's just me and Ballant. Yeah, that's fine. I decided not to bother inviting you because I know how much you hate flying. So I thought we're not going to bother doing that. So me and Balin, we're headed off to CES for the first time this year, locked in our Vegas accommodation, just looking through all the just silly stuff that they got there in the US and Vegas with all their silly hotels.
Say that when you get back home safely, Tim.
Am I going to get flagged at the border now for being like some sort of critic of Vegas hotels? I don't know.
Nah, they're cool over there. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I mean, you're going, I don't care. Do say whatever you want.
It looks like a big CES this year, so that should be good. Some announcements from a lot of the major companies. And
it's huge.
Yeah, we should have a couple of days that are pretty chill there. So, yeah, hopefully we'll meet a couple of people, and yeah, it should be fun. So, if you're around at CES and you want to say hi, I'm sure you'll see us at some point. We could be around. So, yeah, there's that. What else has been happening, Steve?
Well, not too much boring life stuff, which we'll get to obviously towards the end. But yeah, a lot of work-related things have been going on. Obviously, we've been pumping out a fair bit of content. There's a fair bit that will come after this podcast. So next week will be another busy week. And I've heard, it's just going to get busier and busier until we get probably to the tail end of January, if not February. So I've just been working really. I've just been locked in the office working. So I've been fun. I've been enjoying life. It has actually been fun. Even the testing of the Z890 motherboards that I didn't talk about in the last podcast, I don't think, but we talked about it at length on the Hardware Unboxed live stream for Patreon and YouTube members. And I showed, what was it, mountain after mountain of boxes I could barely carry, many kilograms of Z890 motherboards. So yeah, testing those. I've heard on the grapevine that there are, obviously Robert Halleck came out in a podcast or an interview and said that they're aware of Arrow Lake being underwhelming and not as necessarily good as what they thought it would be based on their own internal testing and stuff due to a host of reasons, and they're hoping to address that by December, so possibly later this month, early next month. And I'm hoping that they can we might as well just talk about this. If they can get the 285K to the point where it's offering 14900K like performance in games with a substantial reduction in power consumption with the generally strong productivity performance we've seen, and you could argue that, the Intel platform is superior, right, in terms of PCI Express lanes and stuff like that, and even memory support. Not sure how useful the memory support thing is, but if you need a lot of bandwidth for a certain productivity application, there's probably some benefit there. So it is a good platform. It's a strong platform. And if you can get solid gaming performance, I know the 9800X3D is still miles faster than the 14900K, but if you can get that sort of reliable, stable, high tier gaming performance, it'd be a very good all-rounder platform, I think is fair to say.
At the right price for sure.
Well, there's also that part of it, isn't there? But there is the potential that they could make it a viable option that we could recommend and, do build guides and things of that nature. So I guess my fingers are crossed that Intel can still turn this around and make the platform appealing, somewhat successful, because then having sunk, I'm not even going to calculate the hours, Tim, because that could end up being depressing. But I will be looking at testing around 50 Z890 motherboards, and I'll be doing that in one big, huge content piece that's probably going to be close to an hour long, if not an hour long. And that'll really it'll be heavily optimized to get it inside of an hour. So anyway, we'll be dedicating a lot of time and effort to that, and I hope it's not for no reason, essentially.
Well, I mean, the comments from Intel were pretty interesting about how they're thinking of fixing the gaming performance, because I don't really know how it launched the way they did. They seemed pretty confident that the numbers that they were showing in their pre-launch stuff was like pretty much bang on. And then
Mm,
the reviews came in. I think it wasn't so much like the averages or anything like that. It was more those outliers that you found that were just
mm.
significantly below what Intel were claiming. And you can't really claim, oh, it's like a 14900K for gaming when there's a chance that you run into a game that's like 20% slower.
Which happened
So
a lot more than you like to
yeah.
see. It is, yeah, it's hard to fathom. It's a bit perplexing. It's very confusing how a company the size of Intel, but I think it just speaks to the condition of Intel and the corner that they've sort of painted themselves into over the years where, well, first of all, you have this situation and just their lack of ability to really compete now compared to what we saw not that long ago.
Mm.
So there's a lot of restructuring, I think, that needs to go on with the company. And yeah, I think certain aspects of the company were gutted that shouldn't have been, that have really left them in shambles and end up with what we've seen here.
What sort of areas of the company are you thinking of, like marketing, testing, the product development?
Well, definitely testing for one. I think I talked about this last time. There's a stark contrast between the GPU and the CPU divisions over at Intel.
Yeah.
And you would expect that to be the case, but you would probably expect the CPU division to be much more, let's say, well-funded, well-stocked with competent employees, know what they're doing, know the product inside out. They execute like a well-oiled machine. That would probably be your expectation, whereas the GPU side would be a bit underfunded, a bit more shambles. And that, I mean, it almost appeared that was the case initially. And we thought, oh God, these ARC GPUs, they're a bit of a mess. There's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we praised them multiple times for how on it they were, how quick they address things, and really the condition they've got that whole program in by this point in time. It's quite impressive. And the CPU side of things seems to keep degrading. It's probably not a term Intel wants to hear at this point in time, but that does seem to be the situation. And yeah, I mean, our point of contact at Intel has been great, based over in the US team. I'm not going to name names because I don't know if that creates any problems, but yeah, he's been great, and he's not even necessarily from the CPU team. It's more overseas ARC and whatnot. And it's just weird, a company as big as Intel, and we're not small tech reviewers. I mean, we are, but we've got a bit of reach. Like, people have heard of Harbor Unboxed, generally speaking, if you're a PC enthusiast and you watch online reviews, and we're one of the bigger tech channels in the Asia Pacific region. So we're kind of known, to quote Ron Burgundy, we're kind of a big deal. I've even lost my train of thought of where I was going with that, Tim. No, but it's essentially, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've been in the industry a long time. Harbor Unbox is kind of a thing now. And we don't really have a proper contact at Intel for CPUs. So it's always just luck of the draw as to whether or not we get samples, in sort of what time frame we get them, what we actually end up getting. We've kind of relied on Intel's partners for communication and troubleshooting and all that stuff. Whereas with AMD, it's been a different situation as far back as I can remember. But certainly since Ryzen burst on the scene, AMD has just been on it. And of course, in the early days, Robert Halleck was a big part of that for AMD, and now he's shifted over to Intel. So maybe he'll see things change a bit there. But as I said, there's guys that are on the GPU side of things that certainly seem very competent and very, very invested, passionate about Intel and the products Intel are making, and want to see them return to their former glory, if you will. But yeah, it's weird, right? That, because you probably have a similar situation. You used to test Intel CPUs on laptops and that. Have you really had any, like, the direct sort of contact we have with AMD, for example, or even NVIDIA? NVIDIA are great with that as well. Intel CPUs.
Yeah, I think we have like a local contact for Australia, or at least the Asia region for AMD. We have one for NVIDIA as well. And they're not necessarily based physically in Australia, but they'll handle like the region. And then if we have further questions, they might pass questions over or just give out the emails for like the global team or the US team or whoever. But yeah, with Intel, I think they've used like a local PR company every once in a while, but
Mhm.
nothing that's. And when we're talking about contacts at AMD and Nvidia, we're talking about employees at those companies, not a third party, PR team. And those PR teams, at least for technical questions, don't usually have the level of knowledge that you would need to answer some of those questions, which is fair enough. Like if you're just a PR team, like expected to know these questions deeply or anything. But with a company like Intel and Tech Media, you'd probably want to have people that can answer technical questions and those sorts of things available pretty closely for channels like us. And there's plenty of other channels in our region as well that cover these things. Jared on laptops, for example, or Optimum, or one of those channels. So yeah, it's just they've operated a bit differently from the other companies. I think part of that's gone back to what we've talked about with Intel in previous years, is that they were in a dominant position, right? So there wasn't really that need to engage in a big way with various different tech media, because they sold boatloads of CPUs, and they could have just ignored the reviews. But these days it's a little different, so I think they're probably going to have to change a few things with how they operate. And but yeah, like Robert Halleck's there. We saw him in the presentation for the latest CPUs and that sort of thing, and some of the GPU team were in those presentations as well. So it seems like they're sort of figuring it out internally where the best employees are to deal with the marketing and things like that. But those things don't necessarily make like a 285K good product. They still have to execute and make the product good. But yeah, like the communication side of things could be improved, I think.
Yeah, there's clearly issues there. I don't know how something like Arrow Lake, that launch can really happen, where they launch the CPU expecting reviews to be reasonably favorable, decent, and then people are like, well, it doesn't work in this, it doesn't work in that. The
Yeah, the
performance is all
Windows
over the
issues in
place.
particular were a little weird,
Yeah,
weren't they?
and they were caught off guard with that. And there was a heap of BIOS related issues as well, which I expect will also get addressed. And Robert again alluded to those. So very weird. And again, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it or even begin to understand it, because if you had one person that was me or you or Steve from Gamers Nexus or any other reviewers that did a good job, that had 2 days to do some internal testing for Intel, you'd be like, guys, there's heaps of problems here. Reviewers are going to run into just all manner of problems. We need to address these like ASAP. But they just sent them out expecting they were working, and couldn't have been further from the truth. So that's weird. Again, like this stuff's it's not unheard of. Zen 5 was just as confusing. Like again, there was a lot of, and even the fact that Windows 11 had the branch prediction problem with at least Zen 4 and then Zen 5 for so long. It's wild now with that addressed how much faster AMD is than Intel for gaming. That was really holding AMD back in a big way. We're seeing the 7700X match the 14900K now. That's wild. Absolutely outrageous. Like that part used to compete with the 7800X 3D, and now the 7800X 3D is so much faster than anything Intel offers in most games. Like if there'll be some examples where Intel's still ahead, but for the majority of games, AMD has a commanding lead now, which is the craziest thing to come out of the whole Zen 5 launch, really, is the Windows update. So
yeah, I think Intel's probably hurt a little bit by, they've had a pretty consistent release cadence of targeting sort of October-ish or thereabouts every year. And so I can't imagine that these parts have been ready exactly at October every single year. Like there's probably some parts that are a little hotter off the presses, like parts that are probably sitting around a little bit before they're launched. And it seems like with this launch, especially because it's a new platform, new motherboards, those sorts of things, it's come pretty hot. A lot of those problems you'd probably expect to be resolved. But then again, like it's always difficult. If you're saying internally, you're doing your internal testing, you've come up that it's on average parity, but then reviewers not seeing that, it's difficult to figure out exactly what the issues could have been. They could have left it for another month believing that everything was fine, and then it rolls around to reviewers again and the exact same thing happens.
Yeah, I think it's more a combination of things. Like one or two teething issues is very forgivable. They can slip through the cracks, and it's difficult to test everything for a single team. But when you have options in the BIOSes that aren't sticking correctly, or things that are set to auto that should be enabled or disabled, that's a different set of issues at the BIOS level. then when you have compatibility issues with DRM or anti-cheat type stuff, that's like, how did no one launch Fortnite or any of these massively popular games just to see? Well, first of all, I'd want to see how it performs because if you, generally speaking, they test a lot of games to select the most optimal games for representing their product. So you would think a game as hugely popular as, Apex Legends, Fortnite, Warzone, those sort of games that all get tested. And to this day, Fortnite, at least under certain conditions, doesn't load. Just it actually completely locks the system up. So I think
on Arrow Lake.
Yeah, so that video will
weird.
be so this will be going out Friday. So Saturday night we'll have a 285K versus 9800X 3D video with 45 games. There's a lot of interesting results in there, but I couldn't include the the Fortnite results for the 285K because as soon as you execute the game, it just freezes the entire system. So I reported this issue to Intel a little over a week ago.
It's like the biggest game in the world, or one of the biggest games in the world.
It's a big game. You don't have, that's right. Yeah. It's certainly a big game. There's no arguing that. And I notified Intel of this issue just over a week ago, and then they've since confirmed with Epic Games, and they're working on a solution. At this point in time, I do not believe it's been addressed. They haven't notified me that it's been addressed. It's being looked into, and it's an easy anti-cheat problem, compatibility issue there. But it's weird the way it doesn't just like result in the game not loading or getting an error. It hard locks the whole system. It freezes. You need to hard reset. So that's not great. I did that 3 times in a row, and then I tried a couple of other things, couldn't get it to work. So I shot an email off to Intel, and about a week later they were into the investigation on that one. So stuff like that's teething issues, right? That's acceptable to happen for the day one reviews where we haven't been able to get Microsoft or Epic Games or whoever's involved to address this in time, but we're working with them, and a fix will be here in 2 weeks' time. There's no point delaying the entire product launch for a couple of games that use a certain DRM or anti-cheat feature. But it's more when you get all of these things happening at the same time, you start to think, well, what areas of this are polished? Like what areas are working correctly? And it's like, well, Cinebench runs reliably, but that's probably not good enough for a product review. And especially now that it's been on sale for a while and they are very expensive parts. So if you were to buy one, again, early adopter teething stuff, but there's just a lot of it. So you hope worst case you run into like 1 or 2 of these issues, but not a whole host of them.
Yeah, totally agree. So hopefully Intel can address those problems with the BIOS updates that they're targeting for next month and, improve the platform. Because we don't want to see these, I know we've criticized it and those sort of things, but we would like all of these CPU launches to be great. Like we want products that are great and worth recommending. And, even if it turns out not to be a broad recommendation, like if there's some particular use case or condition where it would make sense to buy, then that's a good win for that type of product. So, but the fact that that's not really possible at this point, as we've talked about in previous episodes, that's the position they need to get it into, need to work towards that, and then that'll be good for people. So, we always hope that things can improve via updates. And at least with teething issues, things like Fortnite not working, it's very unlikely that's going to be the case in 6 months from now. Like they're probably going to be able to fix that.
They better fix it in about 2 weeks because you'd be pissed if you played a lot of Fortnite. You bought this thing, spent $630 on it, and it can't load Fortnite. That's ridiculous. True. Again, it's an acceptable teething issue, but it has to be addressed very quickly. Ideally, you would like those issues ironed out and addressed prior to public consumption, but if not shortly after.
Yeah, I think I'm more separating it to inherent product problems, like this general speed of the CPU is not something you can fix with the software update, but something like Fortnite breaking, you probably expect that to be fixed, but we're not expecting a across the board 10% performance improvement on Arrow Lake. We're expecting maybe best case you'll see some of those outliers like Cyberpunk, those sort of games getting fixed, and then that'll bring up the overall average performance, but we're not expecting every game to benefit 5%, 10% from a BIOS update.
Well, you know what, Tim? I have no expectations.
Well,
I
that's
have
true.
none.
Yeah, I guess I
Because
shouldn't say that because the Windows updates and stuff
if I
could
had
fix
if
it.
I had said to you prior to the Zen 5 launch, look, Zen 5 is not going to be super interesting relative to Zen 4, but Ryzen CPUs are going to see on average or somewhere in the range of a 5 to 10% performance uplift on average. Like I think we found across a wide range of games, once all the kinks were ironed out, it was like a 7 or 8% uplift. But Hardware Canucks has since come out and said at 720p, they're seeing a 15% on average uplift, like 10% at 1080p.
Okay.
So it does really depend on the games you use. But yeah, imagine if I'd just come out and said to you, like, these Ryzen processors, Zen 4, Zen 5, they're going to Windows update, it's going to boost performance by 10% on average. That's really unheard of. So,
yeah, I'd think you're a grifter.
well, I wouldn't blame you because that is a very grifter thing to say. But yeah, it turns out that is actually the reality of that situation. There are, in certain instances, absolutely mind-blowing gains to be had on 24H2 for Ryzen processors. Unfortunately, 24H2 seems to have a lot of its own teething issues, which is just lovely. But again, this is how these... that's
Microsoft.
Well, it is, but also the ecosystem, the various different platforms, they're so complicated and so... I don't know, there's so many different hardware configurations and different platforms, and it'd be a nightmare trying to get them all to work optimally, I would have thought. So I guess in a sense you can cut them a bit of slack, but at the same time you think with the resources they should have available, like what we're just talking about Intel, they should certainly be able to do a better job than they do. But yeah, at the same time we acknowledge it's probably extremely difficult.
Well, I mean, I loaded up Microsoft Excel this week and I saw they've just added in Copilot functionality. So their priorities are in the best possible place when they're adding that into Excel. So
that's just what Excel needs. Yeah, great.
All right, I want to rant about something in the middle of this podcast episode.
Us having a rant. I mean, you're having a rant. I may join in. I'd like to.
Yeah. So I saw you on X/Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X.
Wasn't me.
Engaging with some trolls. And that brought me to think about just, I guess, my experience using social media over the last couple of years and how it just sucks now. Like, I'll just be honest, it just sucks now. I'd say I sort of grew up using social media. So a lot of these platforms were coming out when I was still in school. So things like Facebook, sort of the early days of that MySpace back in the day, those were like big when I was in school. So I've grown up for a fairly significant part of my life using platforms like what used to be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and those sort of things. And every time I load up, like, I'll use X as with probably the worst example. All I want to do on there is get like maybe some gaming news, maybe some tech news, see what people are saying about, like, the stuff that we cover, PC hardware and things, maybe some sports stuff as well for like AFL or cricket or whatever. That's what I want. I feel like all of this profiling that is done, all that ad tracking and all of that stuff, right, surely means that these companies can make a great profile of the things I'm interested in. They can look at who I'm following. It's all that sort of stuff. It's the hardware unboxed, the gamers nexuses and all those sorts of things. I load it up. There's the algorithmic feed and it's all just garbage. Just reams of crap, like trolls, engagement farming, bots. Like, you look at the replies to things, it's just crap in there. It's not good. It's bad. And all I want to do on these platforms is just, have a bit of fun and chat to people about these sort of things. But yeah, the state of X now is terrible. And this has come about because I saw a lot of people from the gaming side of things that I follow on Twitter/X and other platforms talking about Blue Sky, which I'd heard about a bit before, but a lot of people were like, yeah, we're just moving over here now. So I gave it a try. I've made a hardware unboxed Blue Sky account. But that platform, which I'm not very familiar with because I've only just started using it, it sort of highlights how bad X is, because on there, it prioritizes a lot of things that X doesn't prioritize. So remember that back in the days when there was like Google Reader for RSS feeds and those sort of things?
Oh, yeah.
And you could just, you load up an app, it's just got the news, it's in chronological order. You go through, you're browsing your Tom's Hardwares and your tech power-ups and Tech Spot and those sort of sites, all just ready to go. And then with social media, it turned into, well, now you're in the algorithmic feed, so you might see some of that content every once in a while. And then platforms like Meta and X decided, well, let's deprioritize links because no one wants to click those, and we don't want to get people off the app. So we'll minimize all that stuff, and we'll maximize all the engagement farming videos of people with their families, like rolling coins down tables and whatever BS there is on there, right? And so you on Blue Sky, it's just a normal feed. So I can now go back in there, and not every website's on there, but at least a lot of the gaming stuff is, just get a feed of like gaming news and people like actual people, not bots and engagement farmers talking about stuff. And that just, when I use that platform after people were saying, oh, you should go make an account or whatever, I go back to using even like Instagram, for example, which is exactly the same sort of stuff, just video content. It's, yeah, I don't know what you think about those platforms, but I've just been just so disappointed in trying to just get where's my tech news? Just give me my tech news. If you're going to kill off RSS feeds and you're going to make social media bad, and what are we left with? Like YouTube, which isn't even that good for, certain things like just getting breaking news snippets or whatever. Anyway, that's my rant for the middle of this episode.
Well, I agree. And I just want to preface this by saying I am by no means an expert on this subject. I try to minimize my exposure to all of this. But here is my armchair analysis of the situation for you, Tim. So
sure,
prepare to be enlightened. I think the problem. What are you scoffing at?
No. Go ahead.
Oh, there was a weird sound I heard. All right. I think the problem is these platforms all want to become profitable, and it's the same thing with everything, right? Like greed, more profit, whatever it may be. Yeah. So you get Blue Sky. Hey guys, we do it the right way. Blah blah blah. They do that in an effort. It's like your Zen moment, right? They do that in an effort to win people over, become popular, become successful. And then by doing that, you then get higher server costs and whatnot. It's a more expensive platform to maintain, run. There's more people on it. So then there's more resources have to be allocated to getting rid of bots and fending off hacking attempts and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, well, to survive, we need to become profitable. So how do we become profitable? Oh, selling data, running ads, and then it just becomes X again. So I'm not defending those platforms because you can certainly have a good social media platform without a lot of that crap, but like it's sustainable, I guess is what I'm saying. But then they want to be really profitable, and then they want to be even more profitable, and they want to make even more money.
Well, it's the growth sort of mindset, isn't it?
It's how all of these things go. It doesn't matter if it's, Netflix, some sort of streaming thing. They all start amazing. Like, I mean, I haven't really used Netflix or whatever, but my read on this situation based on people who do was it started off really good. It was quite affordable. The service was awesome. I think the password sharing was a big thing. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And then they weeded out all of those things, and it just got worse over time. It got worse and cost more as they eliminated the competition. So, and if you can't eliminate the competition, then the competition that exists has to be appealing. Like it sounds like Blue Sky is doing a reasonable job of that, and then they'll probably get crushed one way or another, or they'll just join the herd of garbage platforms. So,
well, hopefully that doesn't. What I'm hoping for at least is that can be held off for at least a few years, so we could just have a cycle of new apps coming in. But yeah, I mean, it's growth mindset, right? Like it's executives who want, and we've criticized the tech companies for doing this, is short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. You want to have all the money right now, and so you don't think about what is a sustainable solution for this, what is a sustainable growth for these sort of platforms. Like there's a limited amount of people that are ever going to use these sorts of things, so you can never just grow forever. And so I think what you're saying definitely plays into it, where these companies, they start off doing all the good stuff that people want. Like they know what most people want, and then they do that, and that gets them all the users. But then that caps out at a certain level. It might be 50 million, 100 million users or whatever. And so they're like, well, instead of making a sustainable platform where we could maintain 100 million users, which is what I would do because I'm not, some greedy, executive person that wants big pay packets or whatever, they go, oh, how do we get another 10 million users to the platforms? And like, well, how about we make it dumber? So, all the people that want like engagement farming stuff, well, let's put that in there. And so they put that in there. And then you run to the issue where you add 10 million new people who like the engagement farming stuff, but then over time, you eventually might lose 10 million people who wanted what they signed up for to begin with. And that's what I feel like a lot of these platforms have done. And like I've used Threads, which is the Facebook version of Twitter/X, but that's just text version of Instagram. So on Instagram, it's like algorithmic feed, serves you engagement farming, serves you, basically the text version of that. There's no news or links or anything like that because they all minimize all that stuff. And it's all people being like, I made a business and, here's my 10, strategic things I did to be successful. And then you have to click through to get their huge long list of, just stuff I'm not interested in. That's all Threads is.
Yep.
So I hope at least that there will be platforms that acknowledge why people go to them in the first place and continue to do that for as long as possible. And I feel like while we can criticize like YouTube, for example, for, making some decisions that I probably wouldn't agree with, I feel like YouTube has resisted a lot of this in a number of ways to the point where the main thing that YouTube did when it began and what it does now is still pretty similar. Like there's some differences with algorithmic feeds and stuff, but generally it's pretty much still a long form video platform. And so I guess that's why it continues to be very, very popular. Whereas a lot of the other places have kind of changed what they do. Anyway, that's just my rant in the middle of this about social media.
Yeah, look, I largely agree. I'm not a huge fan of social media. There are some aspects of it that are great and have been a benefit, but there's a lot of it that's been abused and not really used in the way it should be. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, if I was someone who wanted to engage a lot and talk about tech, X would be the last place to do it. It's just, for a lack of a better term, it's a complete and utter shit show. Like, I try not to go there. I'll get sucked in and like be quite active for a couple of days, and that's probably more to do with the type of work I'm doing. So
yeah, like it's a benchmark day equals let's scroll on X, because I definitely do that too.
Well, that can happen during a benchmark day if, for example, you've got both test systems wrapped up because they're updating Microsoft Flight Simulator or something, and then you haven't got a script to write and there's not much else to do, so you get sucked in there. For me, more recently, it's been, I'm doing these huge motherboard tests, which take quite a lot of time, and I'm doing fewer quick repetition type benchmarks. It's more the long validation type stuff. So that'll see me sort of check various different things and then check comments and go to X and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, generally I just try to avoid it. But if I was someone that wanted to do it, I would honestly turn, this isn't promoting the Harbour Unbox Discord server, at least that's not the intention, but I would go to a Discord server. Now, there are free ones to access. Ours is relatively inexpensive. I think one's a couple of dollars you can access it per month for. So, but I'm not necessarily, like Gamers Nexus has one, so it's not just us. There's heaps of tech channels and just channels within Discord that are, PC master race type things. And that's probably where I'd spend my time. Ours, for example, is heavily, it is moderated. So you shouldn't be abused by someone in there. Unfortunately, we have had to ban a few people over time from ours.
Like 2 or 3, but
2 or 3, which is disappointing. But
I think it's almost self-moderated because it's not free. So it's kind of like, you're just getting rid of all the people that are wasting time for that reason.
For the most part, yeah. So it's a great place to hang out, talk tech, but we do have a moderation team that, make sure things are, there's a set of rules.
And thanks to our moderators for moderating our Discord for us.
Yes, they do a great job. And our rules are fairly civilized, pretty basic and straightforward. They really shouldn't need to be there, but evidently they do.
Yeah, it's just comments. But I totally agree with you. Like Discord is definitely the main place these days. I feel like even I don't use Reddit a lot, and I'm not a huge fan of all the discussions on there, but Reddit is much more reasonable than X these days.
It's unbelievable how much better Reddit has become. And I don't know what the reason for that is, but I've seen it become increasingly viable, usable.
Yeah, very reasonable discussions on there. Just like just sane
Surprising.
people, talking about just normal stuff on there, which is great to see, especially in the more general like PC ones. Like if you go to r/Nvidia, for example, you're going to get people that are more interested in the Nvidia stuff, but like the bigger
Yeah,
generalist ones are
R
pretty
slash
good.
hardware used to be just a complete and utter cesspool. And I've been
Yeah,
stunned over the last probably 12 months how reasonable and fairly well educated a lot of the comments and discussions
yeah,
are. So I don't know. I don't know how that's come about. I don't know what's improved there, but yeah. Again, I'm not a huge. I don't check it out all the time, but I do from time to time read pretty much entire threads on like Gamers Nexus videos and things like that to see what people have to
yeah.
say. And it used to just be some brutal reading. And I don't mean just like savage. I mean also like I was losing intelligence just spending time there. It was,
Yeah.
yeah, brain cells were dying. So,
Yeah, there's some good older forums as well. Hopefully, like the Anantech forum stays around for a while because I don't actively post there or anything, but I've read a few good threads in places like that. But yeah, like
I think Hard OCP is another good one as well.
yeah, that's right. There's some good forums, and that's the sort of thing that I guess now that I've sort of grown up with social media and then it's sort of become, just a pile of crap, is I'm just interested in like just engaging with real people who want to have like smart, intelligent discussions where I can like learn stuff, like where I can look on there.
Tim, going on the internet.
I know. I've got high expectations, don't I? Unrealistic expectations, but I feel like a Discord
Uh,
community is a great place for that. Reddit's improving. There's good
mhm.
forums and things like that, and hopefully, I don't know how much we'll post on Blue Sky or whatever, but and there's not a lot of like to be clear, if you're signing up to Blue Sky expecting like a big tech community, there isn't a big tech community there at the moment. It's very light on with the tech sort of stuff. I made a Hardware Unboxed account, which I've posted on a couple of times, but we'll do our part.
I can see Tim puts out a tech related message and basically no one replies, and Tim's like, I like it here. This is nice.
Well, to be fair, the engagement is actually pretty reasonable given how many
Okay.
people are following us there, which is like not
Yeah.
that many. But if you're interested in gaming news right now, so like you want to learn about like game reviews and people talking about upcoming games and that sort of thing, Blue Sky is great for that. A lot of the gaming discussions have moved over there from X, so it's really good for gaming. Tech stuff, we'll see what happens. But yeah, we're on there. I don't know.
Oh,
I'll
oh.
probably stop posting on there like threads eventually. But
On that note, though, you said something that triggered a thought with me about like the size of the platform and how many people are using it. I found that's true on YouTube though. So if you start a new YouTube channel, even if it's a tech channel, like I remember when Hardware, but look, it was a different point in time as well, which probably plays a huge factor. But I have seen it with other up and coming channels like Daniel Owen, for example,
yeah,
who's well on his way now. When you start out on YouTube and you have a smaller community, a smaller subscriber base, and just people who generally watch your content, it's a more positive, more
yeah,
productive, more
yep,
intelligent place to be. And then as the channel gets bigger and bigger and reaches a wider audience, and I don't know if that says something about like the percentage of people that comment and then the percentage of those people who probably shouldn't be commenting. I don't know what it is,
yeah,
but I just know that it was a much more enjoyable, much more inspiring place to be a part of when the channel was much smaller. And part of that will be possibly the point in time, but I think a bigger part is just, yeah, it was, you were reaching people who were genuinely interested in the content and genuinely wanted to learn or just enjoy the content. And then, because you get to, at that point, there's a tipping point, right? There's a point where you won't see a dislike on the video until multiple hours or days after it's released, typically speaking,
yeah,
because the people who like what you do, enjoy your content, appreciate what it is that you're doing, generally come, they'll watch, they might like the video. But then there's a tipping point where you get to that, like the troll zone, where you'll release a
yeah,
video and there'll be 20 people that dislike it instantly. Like they're making a difference to the reach of the video. And that's just I don't know, that's productive for them. They've done a thing that they're proud of. Yeah, I'll show you guys. I'll dislike this straight away. And that's the tipping point where you see the comment section start to go sour to a degree. I mean, our video, I'm not complaining. Our fan, well, I don't know if you want to call it fan base, but our viewers, the base at Harbour Unboxed, by and large, it's great. I still enjoy it. It's really good. But that creeps into it. And there's, I don't know what it is, what age the channel has to be, or how many subscribers or views it has to get, where you get to that tipping point where you see the instant dislikes pop up. But
yeah, it's a weird one. I think as well that sort of, especially if those instant dislike people start leaving comments and those sort of things, it can discourage people who just want to have like a normal discussion from having that discussion in the comments, because you scroll down, you see all these weird, weird stuff.
It's like you open a door, you go into a room for a conversation, and it's a creche, and you're like, nope. That's what it can be like. It's real bad.
So yeah, and that's not the case on all of our videos. I've seen plenty of reasonable comments, but just like looking at, man, the last couple of videos it released on Hard Run Box, not to get too deep into comments again, but like,
no, we're doing it.
Look, I was shocked at some of the comments on the NVIDIA app video saying like, so in the video about the NVIDIA app, I think the NVIDIA app's great. It's not a paid video or anything like that. It's like, I genuinely think the NVIDIA app is good, right?
It is.
And there's people just trying to justify like how slow the control panel was as if that was a good thing, and that you're like not a good person for not putting up with it. Like people were like, it's slow, but like, you can't wait a couple of seconds for things to happen in the control panel. It's like, no, I literally, if you give me something better that isn't that slow, no, I can't put up with the slow version anymore. Like,
yeah, I mean,
I just show side by side showing you how fast it is. Anyway,
that can be a type of perspective thing. So, for example, if it's someone who buys a low end GeForce GPU, they've got a budget system, and it's generally just a bit laggy, like they're used to that, then they're kind of a bit taken back by being like, well, how is that a thing? Like waiting milliseconds to a second for a thing to happen, like what's wrong with you? But then on the other side of the fence, it's like, well, when I spend thousands of dollars building a high-end system and everything else on it's snappy, it sucks when you run into an application that's really laggy. So that can be part of it, like those two different perspectives and experiences. But then more likely, I'm an NVIDIA fan, and NVIDIA never released crap software. They were always awesome. But it's like, no, I get you're an NVIDIA fan, but NVIDIA's made it even better. But to acknowledge that, you have to acknowledge that it wasn't that good previously, and that's just that's not a place they're willing to go. And then on the other side of it, you get AMD fans who are like, oh, this Tim guy is always talking about how good NVIDIA stuff is and how it's getting better. Why don't you talk about the Radeon Adrenalin software and talk about Radeon Chill or something? So there's all these different negative opinions coming in from all these different angles, and that's ultimately what we see.
That's some good perspective, actually, because I was struggling to understand some of those comments, especially the ones where it's kind of like there's a lot of comments that are an opinion, like it's just an opinion. And reading comments and actually doing this job is really good for opening your eyes into how diverse people's opinions can be on things, and how people will always have people have some very different interpretations of things and come up with different angles that you don't think of. And we often try and think of covering off many different angles in videos so that everything's well explained, but then you see comments of things you never thought about. So people are very diverse.
Value. Yeah, it can be a lot of value there.
So that's good. But then, you get also, a diversity of trolls, I guess, as well with these videos. But like with opinions and things, I sort of understand more that it's an opinion. You can have an opinion on how a game looks, whether it like looks good or looks bad, that's fine. But when it's something objective, like the speed of loading an application, it's like that's a measurable thing. It's difficult for me to understand an opinion where you're saying that the slower application is better. Like doesn't really.
I guess that's more just coming down to, I don't like change. I was happy with the version we had. I knew where everything was. I don't want a new version. I'm happy with what I had. This is an unnecessary change, and it's angering me. So that can be part of it. I mean, it's just, I guess the ones that bother me, which is possibly what you saw as well, is I really don't mind someone either not understanding something or inquiring further. So, Tim, why?
100%. Yeah.
So, yeah, if the comment's like, Tim, why is it such a big deal that it's milliseconds to seconds faster? Like, I don't really have a problem with that. You know, why does it need to be faster? And, you know, the simple answer to that is, well, it doesn't. Whether you feel like it needs to be or doesn't need to be, it is. So it's of net benefit, but also I'm a high end gamer. That's the situation I'm coming at this from. I have a high speed SSD, and when I click, I want the thing to happen. I don't want to wait a few seconds because that's a bit jarring and a bit laggy. But if that's not your experience, that's perfectly fine. But that's, so you can explain it that way. You can have like, a respectful conversation.
Yeah, civil conversation.
Civil conversation. But more often than not, oh, this guy is such an elitist. You're such an idiot, Tim. Blah, blah, blah. Then they'll throw in like, the Rat Man insult because we love that one. And then, there'll be an insult there. Like, you're a clown and this doesn't need to be faster. It was fine the way it was. And it's like, well, that's tough to work with. So generally you just ignore that and move on. So there's ways of going about things, obviously. I mean, retail workers, especially if there's a retail worker listening to this, will understand this better than anyone. If you come up and you sort of inquire about something you're dissatisfied about and you start off politely and you realize that they don't own the company, these decisions weren't made by them, but perhaps if you're polite to them, they will take the time to help you rather than walk up, get in their face, be loud, hot and bothered and abuse them and expect. It's just like there's ways of going about things. And yeah, I wouldn't hop in a comment section of a Gamers Nexus video and just start abusing Steve and calling him names because I don't like the way he did a thing. But as we said, you're dealing with different levels of education, different personalities, and there could be people who are deliberately doing it because they're trolls. Like they're just doing it for a reaction, attention.
Yeah,
so,
and I can get that perspective because there are times I do enjoy a troll every once in a while, post a bit of an inflammatory response to a comment or something.
You are weird like that. Like, I don't know what it is. It's like Tim is very, well, you're kind of an engineer type. You generally know nonsense, whereas I'm a bit of nonsense. I don't mind joking around, messing around. You're more to the point, get it done, get your facts and all that. But then every now and then, Tim will just hit you with the biggest troll, and you're like, "Where did that?" I don't know. You mix it up, which is good. You keep me on my toes. But yeah, it's a rarity for you. You're a very rare troll, but when you do it, I guess that's why it's so effective because you just never see it coming.
Yeah, you got to pull out the troll every once in a while. I think keep people guessing, keep people interested. But yeah. I'll move on to our final topic that I wanted to talk about, which is something I actually saw on Reddit. We were talking about Reddit earlier.
Yep.
Was this person who I saw this on the PC Master Race subreddit, looks to have burned up their 9800 X3D.
I saw that.
Which is an interesting thing because we saw, what was it, the 7800 X3D? There was some over-volting issues on an Asus motherboard when that product came out. We've got a couple of pictures here of their... which you should probably click through to the link to see these pictures if we're talking about this. Maybe I'll put them up on screen for YouTube watchers. But basically, 9800 X3D has been put into an MSI MAG X870 Tomahawk Wi-Fi motherboard, and it's burned up. There's clear burn marks on the contact pads on the bottom of the CPU. And then in the center of the CPU socket, the AM5 socket, there's clearly been some pins that have burnt out as well in the sort of center along the seams. There's a plastic seam running through the middle of the socket around that area. And it looks to me like some sort of shorting out has happened and, burnt those sort of pins. In addition to this, in the upper left corner, which I find very interesting, is that there is some signs of damage on the socket itself. So there's like a plastic edge that runs around the CPU socket that you slot the CPU into. Then you pull down the bracket on top to sort of force it into the socket. It looks like there's some fractured plastic there or some sort of damage that's occurred in the top left corner of the image and potentially along the left side as well. So it's an interesting, it appears to be a little different, this scenario, than the previous Asus issues where those appeared to be CPUs that had been socketed correctly. and there was voltage issues. This seems to be something else, whether it's some issue with the socket or not. I don't know. Did you have too many early? Not like we're going to investigate this or anything. It's just interesting to see what's happened, really.
Yeah, it's a significant amount of damage. So it does look that it does look as though there is some socket damage. I haven't actually compared the photo of this potentially damaged socket to how an AM5 socket is meant to look. So there may be some other clues that you can learn from that. But yeah, there does certainly look to be some damage. And it's damage that is consistent with not seating either the CPU correctly or orienting it correctly. The locator, like the key tabs, don't look too crushed. But a few years ago, I had a friend who bought a heap of hardware to build his first computer. And I said to him, if you'd like to bring it all over to my place, you can build it, but I'll help walk you through it. And that way, they'll be, oh, no, I'll be right. I can do it all. Okay. Anyway, the computer didn't work. He couldn't get it to turn on at all. Like, it physically wouldn't turn on. And he brought it over, and the Intel CPU was upside down in the socket. And he'd actually closed the mechanism, which had squashed the key locator tabs down. So the CPU was...
Right. Oh, okay.
Anyway, as luck would have it, I was able... Because they were flattened, you couldn't actually put the CPU in correctly now because they were too large to go in the notches. So I ended up digging them out and removing them from the socket, and then turning the CPU around and putting it in the socket, checking the contacts of both. No pins were damaged, and the pads on the CPU looked brand new. Anyway, computer fired up and worked fine. It's just that now with that motherboard, you had to be very careful which way you put it in, because it would essentially go two different ways, because the locator tabs were no longer there. So anyway, that solved that problem. So I don't know if this is a situation where either it wasn't seated quite correctly or it wasn't oriented correctly, which I would have thought if it wasn't oriented correctly, the board probably wouldn't power on, because there is some detection points as to whether or not it'll fire up. And then sometimes even when not seated correctly, it won't fire up, but depends on how incorrectly, because sometimes it'll fire up, but it'll only recognize like 2 of the 4 DIMM slots, for example. Because it's not connecting with all the contact pads. I've also seen similar damage to this, especially being so widespread, the damage. There's obviously quite a few hot spots there. They're spread out. I've seen people where they've taken a CPU out and put it down on a dusty, somewhat dirty surface without realizing, and then put the CPU in the socket, and that's created patches of resistance, which has created, leading to this sort of damage. So was there a hair in there, for example, that was creating a point of resistance that ended up doing this? I don't know. But yeah, so far it's an outlier. We haven't heard of any other reports, so I wouldn't go panicking thinking that there's a design or BIOS related issue like what we saw with the SoC voltage previously. It's also a new part, so maybe there is a problem. I'm sure AMD will be taking a close look at this because it's early days. So if there is a problem, they could address it quite quickly. But I don't think that's the situation. I think it's probably more user error. But yeah, we don't know at this point in time.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Like, I agree there's probably some sort of installation problem with the CPU. I think if they were trying to put it in completely the wrong way, then yeah, like you say, it's probably not going to power on at all. It's possible that if it was slightly misaligned and also the socket, the plastic around the edges was bent or damaged in some way, it's possible the CPU could have been inserted misaligned, because in a normal, perfectly fine socket, it's very difficult to misalign the CPU. Like, once you have got the orientation correct with all the tabs correct, it kind of is a nice snug fit, right? Like, it fits in there. You put the arm down and everything, and it's totally fine. You're not going to have it off by like 1 or 2 degrees. But if the plastic around the outside is actually damaged, then there's, I guess, a potential that it could be off by a couple of degrees, which may cause, some of the pads to be slightly altered. And I don't know where the power comes in the socket. If it's in this central zone, then that would explain why the central zone of the socket has been damaged. But then again, like, even if it was a case of the CPU being misaligned slightly in the socket, we don't know whether the damage caused to the plastic socket part is because of the user trying to force, like really slam that thing down, like force it in at an angle that it wasn't really supposed to go in, or whether it was manufactured incorrectly,
Yeah, it's
causing some
so
sort
hard to
of
say. Yeah.
fracture or
You don't actually
causing it to
have
be
to.
misaligned.
You actually don't have to be too ham-fisted, like and slam it down. You just have to position the CPU gently, but incorrectly,
Yeah.
because it's the locking mechanism, the retention mechanism
Mm.
that does all the damage. Because you do have to push that down. Well, you don't even have to push that down hard, right? Because if it's unaligned, rather than sitting completely flush, it'll be up a millimeter or two.
Yeah.
And then when you close the latch, that'll take up that gap and squash it down. And it
Yeah.
does that with reasonably minimal resistance on behalf of the person with their thumb on the end of the lever, because it's a lever. So that takes up most of the pressure there and just flattens it in, crushes the plastic. So it is easy to do without realizing you're doing it. It's not as probably stupid as it sounds. But look, the CPU is a couple of days old, right? If there is a problem that is causing CPUs to burn up in sockets that badly, you are going to know about it quick if one's already done it. Like, this isn't a long-term degradation thing. Like, the SoC voltage took a while to do. If someone's able to burn a CPU up to this degree within a matter of days, there'll be more examples. Realistically, we probably should have already heard about them. But certainly within the next week, we'll know about it. Like, by the next podcast, if no more of this has happened, then it's either a user error or some sort of manufacturing defect is almost certainly going to be the situation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's interesting because I hadn't really thought about the actual mechanism of how the thing is shut down, but you're right that it's very much a crushing process, because it's not a case where if the CPU is slightly misaligned, the closing process will realign it for you. You have to ensure the alignment is perfect in the socket before you start the process. Because, there's some things where, you start to close like a lid or something, and anything that's like slightly misaligned will just, go into place naturally.
It can, when you drop it on the CPU, it can knock it into place, but that is far from guaranteed.
Yeah, that's right. But if you've got the circumstances just slightly off or slightly wrong in how you've mounted it, it is possible that you put you rest the metal thing down and start crushing it in.
What you're saying is there isn't a mechanism in place that self-aligns the CPU.
That's right.
It's a luck of the draw. It'll either tap it and it will fall into place, or it will just squash it in the wrong place. It's luck of the draw.
Yeah, that's right. So, I'm sure some investigation will figure out exactly what that's happened. But I don't think this is cause for concern or anything like that, especially because this appears to be an isolated incident. And just scrolling through the Reddit thread, again, just looking at the reasonableness these days of comments on Reddit in PC Master Race, a lot of people were picking up on the fractures in the plastic around the outside and those sort of things, and sort of looking into it. And I believe Steve from Gamers Nexus is in there asking to buy the parts, so I'm sure that they will look into it. It's kind of their wheelhouse, looking at things like that. So I'm sure they'll try and figure out what's going on there, and hopefully this customer can get a working use those funds or whatever to get a working motherboard and CPU and give it another crack. But you do have to be pretty careful with these components and putting PCs together. I know it's generally thought of to be a fairly simple process, but there are some things that you have to get, make sure things like compatibility is all correct and that you're aligning these things properly, that you're pushing in things like DIMMs the whole way into the socket, and things that, for us who've built, countless PCs, it's all like fairly straightforward stuff that we've done many times. But this could have been someone's first PC or their second PC, the second time they've ever slot in a CPU of this design. Like if you're on AM4, you had a completely different socket design to this prior to this generation. So if this is your first time ever using an LGA socket like this, it's going to be, there's points where these sort of things can happen. So
one last topic I want to continue on, which you haven't probably, weren't planning on touching on, but is the not necessarily the comments from the 4K CPU benchmarking video. We talked about this last week.
Yeah.
But I had a few more thoughts on it. And obviously since then, I did release a video that covered this in depth in almost 40 minutes. And I guess the reason why I want to talk about it here is because quite a few people commented last week saying, wow, that was the first time I've actually heard this discussed and I understand it better and now it makes sense to me. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah,
obviously
nice.
There was some people that still weren't convinced by the whole thing. But yeah, it's one of those ongoing topics. And I think probably the point, at least that's worth entertaining, let's say, that people come at this from is, I just want to see 1080p and 1440p benchmarks to know if it's worth upgrading, my CPU. Like, is it actually going to offer me any extra performance, or am I going to be GPU limited? That's the general gist of the feedback we get from people who have a legitimate concern, let's say, with these low resolution benchmarks. The problem is, you're asking for something from a CPU review that the CPU review was never designed or intended to do.
Yeah.
That's one problem. The other problem is, what you're asking for doesn't actually tell you what you think it tells you. You also don't need to be told what you think it's going to tell you. And then on top of that, the biggest problem we have with it is, because people will say, well, surely guys, do the testing you're normally doing. We're not asking for all of the games to be tested at 4K and 1440p, because that's a huge amount of data to go over. It blows out the runtime of the video. Just a couple of things, like Linus Tech Tips did, just a couple of games at 1440p and a couple of games at 4K, which on the face of it, that seems like a reasonable enough request. We're only dedicating a couple of minutes of runtime and, not that much more testing. Problem is, I feel those results and that data is heavily misleading, and it doesn't help out new system builders at all. It definitely misleads them even more. And there are valid reasons, which I explored in that video, for why that is the case. But it doesn't tell you anything you don't learn at 1080p. Now, circle back to I watched the 9800X 3D review. It was really exciting. It's made me feel like I need to upgrade my 7700X. But in reality, I shouldn't do that because I'm mostly GPU limited in the games I play the way I want to play them. It's like, well, you've answered the question then. Like, the review isn't designed to hype you up on a part you don't need. So the review is designed for people who have first and foremost decided they need to buy a new CPU, and they've decided they want to buy a high-end CPU, and now they want to work out which high-end CPU do I buy. I think that's fair, right? That's it. So to get to that point, you have to work out, okay, here are the games I'm playing, here are the frame rates I'm getting. It'd be nice if I could get some more performance out of my system. Okay, are you GPU limited? Check out GPU usage. CPU usage is a worthless thing to monitor. Don't even bother. It's extremely misleading. You want to look at GPU usage exclusively. Now, is your GPU at 95% or higher? If so, you're GPU limited. If you want more frames, you either have to enable upscaling or lower, tweak, tune quality settings. So if you go and tune quality settings and you do so to a reasonable degree and your frame rate only increases a tiny bit, does your GPU usage then come down? If so, you are right on the edge of a CPU limitation, and to go further, you will need a CPU upgrade. So then you've got to work out how much do you want to spend on that CPU upgrade. And if you have a sort of entry-level to mid-range CPU, you're probably looking at getting the next entry-level to mid-range CPU that makes sense, and probably not going all the way to a flagship Halo premium product that enters the point of diminishing returns. Like, let's be honest, a 9800X 3D is not the best value CPU you can get right now. And again, our review gives you that information. Our review shows you exactly how the 9800X 3D performs when CPU limited, and all the competing CPUs from a range of prices. And then you get the cost per frame data, and you find out that although it's much faster than a 7600X, it actually isn't to the degree that the price is justified. The 7600X is a substantially better value product. And you also see at 1080p that the 7600, I think in our averages, delivers 166 FPS on average across the demanding test games that we test with. So if you're someone that likes to play at 100 FPS, 120 FPS, you're not too fussed, in that range is great. 7600X is obviously going to fit the bill, right? Like it can do that. So you learn all of that from the low resolution testing. So it's this need to be almost like spoon fed the answer, and you think that you're being misled by these bigger margins that you wouldn't necessarily acquire, which is also, and this is why this subject is so difficult to tackle, because we get into the next phase of it. So let's say that's phase one. That's it's a summary, right? It's a pretty crude to the point summary, but that's sort of what I'm trying to do here. The second phase is you're not buying the CPU. This purchase, this investment you're making isn't for the next 10 minutes. It isn't to play Hogwarts Legacy for a week and then whatever. You've decided, step one, you've decided you need a CPU upgrade. You are CPU limited. Your GPU, you're not getting the most out of it. So step one, achieved. Need an upgrade. How much do I want to spend? And the reason you want to know the true performance and the true cost per frame based on CPU limited testing is because you will buy that CPU and almost certainly keep it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And so while the argument, it's misleading because I'm not going to get 20% performance right now. The 9800X 3D might be, let's say, 30% faster than a 9700X. But that's so misleading, guys, because if I buy that CPU and chuck it in my system, I'm not going to see that. I might see 5% or 10%. It's like, but you're wanting to buy the best value CPU now, which wouldn't be the 9800X 3D anyway, and you're going to keep it for at least 2 years, right? You're going to keep it for, most people keep it for 3 or 4 based on our polling data, so that you're not being misled. That extra performance is going to be realized. And we proved that clearly when comparing the 5800X 3D and 3950X. Now, back when the 5800X 3D first burst on the scene, the 3950X was still on sale. You could still buy it. And remember, there was the whole core argument back then. That's died off a fair bit. We don't see that as much anymore. And there were certain channels that were pushing that aren't doing so as much now. But that was the thing, right? 16 big cores, 16 Zen 2 cores were going to age better than 8 Zen 3 cores. That was the thing that people thought, and it was a reasonable enough, let's say, assumption to make. So we got asked a lot, should I buy the 3950X or the 5800X 3D? I don't know about the 5800X 3D. It's only got 8 cores. Is it really going to age that well? And if you look at 4K benchmarks, these GPU limited benchmarks, they're about the same performance now. I think the 3950X is going to age better. Again, that's not stupid. I'm not talking down to people who thought that. It was a reasonable enough thought process. And if you had have only looked at GPU limited testing, you could have concluded anything. But it seemed quite evident that the additional L3 cache and the more efficient cores were able to overcome a CPU with twice as many cores. Like, it just seemed like there was, if you did low resolution CPU bound testing, it seemed like there was no chance in hell the 3950X was ever going to hold a candle to the 5800X 3D. Years later, that is absolutely the case. So we're finding now, if you game at 4K with a 3950X in modern titles under realistic conditions, realistic settings in Starfield, you will be CPU limited. You will be CPU limited with a reasonably high-end GPU, whereas you won't be, at least not to nearly the same degree, with a 5800X 3D. So when it's not about just here and now. And I guess why people discredit that is because we always say don't buy based on the future, like future-proofing. It's not a thing to do. But that's the future-proofing angle is more what I was talking about with the 3950X, right? It's an assumption. It's not that you prove it in the here. Like, the 5800X 3D was a faster, superior gaming CPU back then. Whether or not you needed all of that performance back then was sort of beside the point. But if you were spending roughly that amount of money, you could have got either of the CPUs. So the future-proofing thing's like a leap of faith. Like, I think having 128 gigabytes of RAM now will pay off on this platform. But I don't know.
The future-proofing angle is when you don't have any evidence that something is better now. So you're sort of guessing into the future, which could be the case for, people talk about like AMD Fine Wine or something, or, some company promises a driver update or something to, this will get better in 3 months once we roll out our big update, and it'll give you 20% more performance or whatever. Well, we're not going to review based on a promise that in the future it's going to be 20% faster or better or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about products where you could at the time prove that there was a real difference. And over time, we have seen consistently that lower resolution benchmarking, or any benchmarking where you're genuinely CPU limited, accurately predicts CPU limits in future games. There's been you have to go to very specific configurations. I think we've talked about things like 4-core 4 threads versus 6-core 12 threads.
Where the games were using one thread.
Yeah, so there are some examples of that in very specific configurations, but in general, if we're looking at CPU limited performance, that predicts what will be the case for future CPU limited games. It's less that the CPU is getting better over time and showing you more and more gains over time. It's that the products are always faster. The two CPUs you're comparing, one's always faster than the other. It's just your usage of that part is changing to the point where you're noticing the differences more, which is, it's kind of like anything, right? Like if you buy a new OLED monitor and you're playing just SDR games, and then one day you decide to turn it onto the HDR mode, it's like, whoa, this is so much better. Like you've unlocked
the full value of the product.
Yeah, I'm finally utilizing all of that. It doesn't mean that suddenly the product is much better than it was when you got it. It's that the product was always good and it was always meant for that use case and was always the best in that configuration, just that now you're starting to use it that way.
Yeah, it's a similar thing when you compare the 7800X3D with the 9800X3D. Now, to be clear, I'm not recommending anybody with a 7800X3D upgrade to a 9800X3D unless they've got plenty of cash to burn. It's a thing they just want to do, but that is not necessarily my buying advice. We're seeing across a wide range of games right now, there is an 8% performance uplift. Yeah, the performance uplift can be larger than that depending on the sample of games you use, but across 45 games, I have found an 8% uplift. Now, if we get 2 years down the track, those 20% uplifts that we see in certain games under certain conditions will become more of the norm. So the gap between the 7800X3D and 9800X3D, the average gap that we're seeing now, will broaden. It will almost certainly broaden. So as games become more increasingly demanding, the 9800X3D's full potential will be realized. But again, we've seen the full potential with the low resolution CPU bound benchmarking and the most demanding games that we have available today. So it won't be something that we discover and it's like, wow, we never saw this coming. It's like, no, we've established that this is the top end of what you would, it's the same thing with the VRAM thing, right? That's not really a future-proofing angle. There were signs a long time ago that mid to high-end range GPUs with only 8 gigabytes of VRAM were going to be problematic within a few years. And, it's great now. I'm seeing more and more people, and even people who were fighting the 8 gigabyte VRAM thing a while ago, like the what we're talking about on X, the classic expert commentators on X, a lot of them now are waking up and being like, 8 gigabytes of VRAM is not enough. Like there are too many games now where it sucks. So that future has come to fruition. It's what we predicted would happen. Again, people are listening to this and a bit confused by it. If you have an entry-level GPU, a Radeon RX 6600 with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, fine. If there's a $150 next-generation GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, fine. But if there's a $400 US GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you're going to hear some stuff from me on that one. But anyway, that's a different topic.
I think that you would explode if there was a $400 next-gen GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM.
Yeah, but I may just sledgehammer it on the desk in front of me.
I think, circling back to the original thing that you were talking about, which is people want to go into a review to figure out should they upgrade or not. Again, I think that's a misread of what reviews are for. Reviews are not designed necessarily to show you this exact performance that you will get in your configuration. And this is true for pretty much any product category. Like if you look at even something like a power supply review where they're showing you, oh yeah, this is going to run, at 700 watts, with no problems and this sort of fan speed and this noise output. They're not testing necessarily to show you, oh, well, under a 300 watt configuration, this is what it does. It's more they're trying to show you and compare products. They're trying to show you the peak performance that it can do. They're trying to compare it to different products. It's not to show you specifically in your configuration, in your specific game or whatever, exactly how it's going to run. There is some onus on you as a viewer to do some sort of research to figure out how to interpret the reviews. So when it comes to a CPU review, as you've said, it's all about figuring out, are you CPU limited or not to justify an upgrade? Something that we just cannot tell you. And this can be true for a GPU review as well. Like, we cannot tell you whether you need a new GPU for 4K gaming.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on 1440p, for example, we can tell you which GPUs are better for 4K gaming, but we can't show you like, oh, yeah, look how much better this is. Those are the sort of questions that you need to ask yourself and figure out for yourself and look into your system to show you, to figure those sort of things out so you can get the most out of these reviews. We're always going to try and remove limits, test them in a scientific way so that you know which products comparatively are the two best products. But as for like what sort of performance you can expect in specific games, that's not really what you should be using a review to do.
Yeah.
Outside of maybe like specific game testing where you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, that's around the sort of level of performance I can expect in this game using these settings with this GPU. Outside of that, reviews are much more, in my opinion, about comparisons between products, percentage differences, cost per frame, those sorts of things.
Really? And this is one of the problems. It's not the biggest problem, but it's one of the problems with it. So, I just want to see show me performance at 4K. You're essentially saying how long is a piece of string?
Yep.
Because it depends on how long you want the string to be.
Mm-hmm.
What is your minimum acceptable length of string? What's your minimum acceptable level of performance? Because you're not going to play. If I show you GPU limited 4K results at, like I said last week, at 45 frames per second, how's that useful to you? If you're not accepting 45 frames per second, then you don't point to that data, which a lot of people will do. Oh, look, the RTX 4090 can only do 45 frames per second in Black Myth Wukong using the cinematic preset. There's no point. Like, see, this is what I'm talking about. CPUs are irrelevant for gaming. You don't need a high-end CPU. That's dumb. And that is the conclusion a lot of people will draw. But really, the question is, are you going to play Black Myth Wukong at 45 frames per second? You might. Good chance you probably won't based on polling data. I certainly wouldn't. Would you, Tim?
No, and I didn't.
So if your GPU can only deliver 45 frames per second at the resolution that you deem, the resolution you're playing at, you're likely going to enable upscaling. And if that alone doesn't do the trick, you'll tune the quality settings. If lowering shadow quality 1 notch improves performance by 20%, you'll do that. And you'll get back to your minimum desired frame rate. And if it's not 45 FPS that we're showing, then our data is useless and likely misleading. In the context of a CPU review, it certainly is. So if you require 60 FPS, then you'd want to see that. But again, 1080p answers all of this. If the CPU can throughput 120 FPS, then it can throughput 60. And I don't know if some people think that CPU performance scales with resolution in the sense that GPU performance does. So by going to 4K, you're increasing the CPU load by 4 times. I'm not sure if that's a misconception that's factoring into this, but that's certainly not the case. The 1080p results tell you everything you need to know about the CPU load and the CPU performance. And again, if you want to, there are gamers who game at 4K on high-end hardware that want a minimum of 120 FPS or a minimum of 144 FPS, and they're willing to sacrifice visual quality settings for that smoother, more desirable experience. And I would certainly be more on that end of the spectrum than I would be 60 FPS. And that's, ignoring frame generation, frame gen, which I'm not super interested in. But again, the problem with this conversation is there can be the what ifs or I want this or what about this angle, almost endless options. And again, people take this as being arrogant or whatever, but I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I've seen countless times how computer hardware ages. I've seen how games become increasingly more demanding and what that does. I've seen a lot of this stuff. So if I'm telling you that 1080p is really all you need to make your next CPU purchase and get the best deal possible, and Gamers Nexus is doing the same thing, and basically everyone else, it's probably not worth arguing with that. Again, it's not like we know best, don't argue with us or don't make any suggestions. It's just that I think we've presented this argument with a lot of information, a lot of data. And really, if you go and look at that 5800X, 5800X 3D, and 3950X testing with the 2022 and older games, and then with the 2023 and newer games, and that doesn't convince you of what we've been saying, yeah, I guess I just have to give up at that point. But yeah, we will not be for CPU reviews including higher resolutions, because the exploration into this, the further investigation, the looking at this as closely as we have, has proven to me more than ever that it's bad to have high resolution testing. Now you can argue about 720p or 1080p. I mean, in our testing, it doesn't make too much difference because we are generally so CPU bound anyway, and we're using a high end GPU. But going to 1440p becomes an issue. 4K is just absurd.
Yep.
So, and for those who are wondering about why we don't go down to 720p, it's because we found numerous examples where the GPU performance actually regresses at 720p. And the belief here is that the cores they don't have enough data to be used effectively. So essentially, the management of the GPU tends towards being inefficient, and you lose a small
breaks
amount
down
of,
a bit. Yeah.
you lose a bit of performance. I spoke to this with Steve from Gamers Nexus, and he said, yeah, we've seen the exact same thing in our testing as well, which is why we've stuck with 1080p. But I don't care if you game it. I don't care if you do this testing at 720p or 1080p, whatever. I mean, you should be finding roughly the same thing, and you should be seeing the true performance of the CPU. So, probably leave it at that.
Much more to say.
Probably leave it at that for now.
Yes, let's take a break and come back and talk about the boring life. Okay, we're back to talk about our boring life. And you told me you've got some sort of car-related thing that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, which you love car-related stuff. So I guess I'm talking less to Tim here and more to the audience. Well, we typically don't talk about cars and things at all, really, do we? Largely because it's not something I really want to get into too often with this sort of stuff. And Tim couldn't care less, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
I don't mind cars, but I'm not buying them on the regular or anything.
Well, I think at your stage of your life as well, you're more focused on, the finances of the house and all that sort of stuff. You're not really in the wasting money on car territory. So, but anyway, that's fine. I've always been a car guy from day one.
Yeah.
A generic car guy, let's say. So my first car I imported from Japan, it was an R33 Skyline.
Mm-hmm.
That was when I first, because I've always liked the hands-on stuff, which is I've built my shed, I've learned how to weld, built my desk, play with computers, pull them apart. I mean, that was the hardware side of things, was the whole allure, like building the computers. So I guess that's the kind of person I am. And, bought my first car. How do we make this thing faster? So, changed the plugs, got a new engine management system, bigger turbo, got into the tuning side of it, did a full exhaust, all that sort of stuff. And, it was a lot of fun. I used to track it and do all that. So did that for a long time. Then I got married and that wrecked that. No, my wife was into it. She used to come to the track days as well. And, she used to have a bit of a go. So it was pretty good fun. So that's sort of my initial car background, and we've had a few different cars since then. Couple of fun ones, but not many. Anyway, at the moment, she's driving a Volkswagen All-Track, which we bought basically brand new. It was an dealer demo car. It's been amazing. Really, nothing's gone wrong with it. And yeah, it's been really reliable, really good, super fuel efficient. Just a really great. I wouldn't even say boring family car because it's pretty nippy, handles really well. I chuck like 1.5 ton on it every now and then when we go up north to go fishing. So it's sort of my fishing car as well. So that's been great. but it's sort of time for a new car. But we're going to keep that car because it's been so good, and I want to keep it as sort of my fishing adventure car. So it's been really capable. Anyway, so Matt, who, from Harbour Unboxed, who started the channel all those years ago, he recently bought a new BMW X5, the diesel version, so V6 turbo diesel. I don't remember the exact. I'm not super familiar with the BMW. It's like the X-Drive diesel thing. People who are listening that know about them will know.
And that's an SUV, right?
It's an SUV. So Matt is quite thorough. He's sort of into his cars as well, but more on, he wanted a good family car. So he drove Audi Q7s, Q8s, Volkswagen Touareg, a few others, and ultimately felt he in his opinion the BMW X5 was significantly better than anything else. Like, he was wrapped with how good it was. I think I talked about how he went to the US a year ago and was in Vegas, and when he was over there, he got a BMW X7, basically the same car, brand new model. He drove that around over there and loved it. But I can't remember what he said here. It was harder to get exactly what he wanted here or something, so he landed on the X5. It was car prices in Australia are absurd, by the way, relative to somewhere like the US, especially luxury cars. It's a bit crazy. So anyway, he bought the BMW. My wife's been tossing up for like a year now what we should get, and she basically leaves it up to me. She's like, I want a new car. She was leaning towards the SUV thing. She liked the idea of like a Q7 or something. Anyway, Matt came over to visit because he had an interesting story, computer related, where his crap blew up. so he drove out here to visit me for a bit of tech support like 2 weeks ago, and he brought his new BMW. Anyway, my wife said to him, "Can I take it for a spin?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." So he chucked her the keys and off she went for 20 minutes, came back, was very sold on it, loved it, thought it was amazing. So that was pretty, I didn't really care what we got. It was mostly for her. So she thought it was phenomenal. So that's what we were getting. Anyway, I'd been doing a bit of research into them since Matt got one, and being the hoon that I am, I was very interested in the M50i, which is a V8 4.4 litre twin turbo model. It makes, I think, 390 kilowatts stock and does 0 to 100 in like 4.1 seconds.
But you definitely drive at the speed limit in residential areas, just to check, because as YouTubers, we need to confirm these days that we drive to the speed limit in residential areas.
I can honestly say in residential ares, I do.
Good.
I'm not sure.
And we don't need to talk about any other driving.
We don't need to elaborate on the backcountry roads. Okay, good. Yeah, no. In all seriousness, around residential areas, you should do the speed limit because there are children and animals and things and reversing cars. So if you are going to be stupid, if you're going to be a dummy, pick your spots, please, and times. That's all I'll say on that. But anyway, I do enjoy a nimble vehicle. Especially one that sounds good. We won't go down the EV path if we can help it, at least not yet. I'm not willing to give up on my sweet sounding cars just yet. Anyway, my wife, who is very sensible, not a hoon, but does enjoy a nice car, I said to her, they make a V8, which sounds damn sweet, and it's not too much more expensive. That's what I said. And anyway, I showed her a couple of YouTube videos thinking she'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that's a bit outrageous," or "I'm not going to drive that." That's my expectation. And we watched a couple of videos. She's like, "Wow, you've really sold me on this one. It looks pretty good." I was like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, that sounds nice, and they go well." I'm like, "Oh, so you want that?" And she's like, "Well, yeah." All right, done. So that's all I needed to hear. So yeah, the family car went from a 4-cylinder turbo diesel Volkswagen to now I've purchased a 4.4 litre twin turbo V8, which is stock at the moment, but maybe seeing a couple of upgrades coming its way just quietly. So anyway, I've ordered that. It should be arriving tomorrow.
Right. So you bought one. Did you buy one new?
Relatively new, not brand. I never buy brand new. I can't do it.
Right. Because I was just looking, because what is the new price of the car? I think I'm on the BMW website.
I don't know. They're probably 160, 170.
Yeah, that's about right. Which is more than I would pay for a car.
Yeah,
I
no,
think paying about 10 grand for a car is too much.
well, I've paid
Not
too
new.
much then, Tim. No, look, it's nowhere near the price of the brand spank because it's 2 years old and
Right. Okay. So yeah.
the price falls off dramatically. I always buy a car usually about 2 years old. And I wait for like the new version, like, you know, if there's a radical new generation, let's say, I wait for that
Yeah.
generation to be released and I patiently wait 2 years and then I buy one. It's still like an absurd, stupid amount of money, but we paid very little for the Volkswagen. It's still worth close to what I paid for it because I got it before the COVID thing and car prices went stupid in Australia and probably most of the world. And I'm not. This is not being financed or anything. So because the finance thing's funny, right?
Mr. Rich YouTuber here buying his 2-year-old $160,000 cars outright. You're being exposed.
I don't know how to proceed now, but no, I was going to say people are very. This is just general. I'm not. This isn't financial advice, by the way. This is just my general thinking. People are really against buying it outright because you could invest that money, right? So you're better off. But because the business loans are personal, like this is through the business as well for the most part. You have to invest that money to make back more money than what you would do paying a hefty loan like that. So anyway,
yeah, like the total cost of the car after the loan is pretty.
The takeaway here, Tim, before you took the piss out of me, was that I prefer to save and be patient for 2 years and get the money for whether it's a $10,000 vehicle, a $40,000 vehicle, an $80,000, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. That's beside the point. I like to save the money rather than yeah. And I mean, I'm a lot older than Tim, okay, guys. So my house is paid off. I've paid off my house. I'm old. I have no debt. My previous Volkswagen, nothing owing on it. I have my own car. I have nothing owing on that. So I save up and I do it that way. I'm not leveraging or going. So anyway, screw you, Tim.
What are you talking about? I could buy at least 3 of these outright.
You could. You'd be paying them back for the next 10 years.
No, that's definitely not true. I definitely couldn't afford to buy 3.
Well, you
$160,000 cars outright.
Yeah, not that I'm going to expose you in this, Tim, but you've done a smart thing. You've invested every last dollar essentially into your awesome property, which is what you should do, right? That's where you should start out. So, I mean, I'm not saying you should overcapitalize or leverage yourself to the point where if there's any kind of economic downturn, you lose your house and end up having to declare bankruptcy because you can't service the loan. You're not in that situation.
You're just saying I do think I've prioritized different things in my life.
Well, you've done exactly what I did. I mean, I did the stupid Skyline and then I got rid of that and then I saved for a deposit and then I bought my house and then I worked my backside off for just over a decade and pumped every last dollar into paying my loan off. And that's what I did. And that's what you're doing. And then one day you may buy a dumb car if you're stupid. Because, I mean, I could invest more money, buy more real estate, do more things, make more money. But I think I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like, whether I have the V8 BMW or your car, ultimately, I don't care. It's not what makes me happy in life. It's not what enriches my life. I'd rather just sit in my studio and test motherboards. I'm a simple man, play a bit of Fortnite. So I'm not really showing off by saying this. There's plenty of people with better cars and whatnot. I'm just merely saying this is my boring life. This is what I did. Well, last week I bought my wife a car. That's that really. And it's something I just saved up for. So,
well, you could tick off a Christmas gift now, maybe a birthday, depending on how close that is.
I told her she's not getting it for the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's good.
I told her she better wash it as well. So she better look after it.
What color did you get?
White. So it'll be a white black one.
That's probably going to look pretty good.
Yeah.
Nice resale value as well, opposed to getting like a brown one.
It looks really tidy. Obviously, I haven't seen it in person. But yeah, it's
cool.
It's arriving tomorrow through a dealer. And yeah, it looks pretty mint from all the photos and stuff. So I'm excited. So maybe in the behind the scenes section on our Discord server, I'll get a couple of clips of it and upload some engine noise. Because I always enjoy that. But anyway, I mean, apart from that, that's my boring life, which, to be honest, is about somewhere in the range of 1,000 times more interesting than my life normally is. Can't say I buy luxury vehicles that often. It's been quite a few
Yep.
years, you could say. So it's not a regular occurrence for me.
Yep.
Yeah. So what about you, Tim?
Well, I have bought things recently as well, but in a completely different field to this. I have bought. Well, I did. I did technically buy it. It doesn't feel too much like buying something. We got 2 new cats.
Oh, how expensive were these cats, Tim?
Not that much because we got them from a pounds. So,
Okay. Okay.
rescue some cats.
Well,
Yeah.
I need something to rip on you for, so try and
Well,
dig a hole.
not this week, maybe.
Damn it.
Yeah. So our previous inside cat unfortunately passed away a couple of months ago. Just got old.
Oh,
died.
really? How old was he?
12 or 13, something
that's
around
not
there.
okay. That's not super old for a cat.
Yeah,
I didn't
unfortunately.
Okay. Well, sorry, I didn't know about that. That sucks.
No, yeah, unfortunately, his heart just gave up on him, so he died, and so yeah, we spent a couple of months, and then decided, yeah, we kind of liked having a cat, so we went to because all of our previous pets and stuff, we've gone to just animal shelters to get them, not necessarily because I'm like against getting puppies or whatever. I didn't want like a kitten as a cat, absolutely not. But
Okay.
the good thing about going to the like rescue shelters, at least here in Australia, is they give you like a full psychological profile of the animals. So you can go in there and basically just pick and choose like the stuff that you want. So we've got a dog, for example. So you can go there and they'll tell you all the cats that they've got, like which ones are good with dogs and which ones aren't.
Gotcha.
And things like that, like which ones are going to be fine to be just inside all the time, which ones like to go outside, fine with other cats, not fine with other cats, that sort of thing. So we've still got an outside cat here, hunting
that's Richard,
rabbits and
isn't
stuff.
it?
Yeah, Richard, our
Richard.
ginger cat.
Yeah, he's still doing his
Yeah,
duties,
he's
keeping
pretty
the place
old.
clean.
Yeah, he's pretty old too. I think he's about 13 years old as
Okay.
well at the moment. But yeah, he does all the outside duties. So anyway, we went there. We were just planning on getting one cat, but there was a bonded pair of cats at the
Okay.
place,
Mhm.
the animal welfare place, and they were both really friendly cats. So we're like, you know what? We'll get 2. We'll get this nice friendship group of cats. They're both about a year old. One is just a black cat, sort of very similar to your black cat, but male, so larger.
Okay. Yep.
And one's a tabby cat, very fluffy, sort of medium to long hair, just sort of like white and brown sort of thing. I'm describing this for audio listeners. Again, there'll probably be some sort of BTS pic in our Discord by the time this goes up. But yeah, so 2 new cats, 2 young cats getting used to living in our house and roaming around and having fun and hiding when there's lots of noise because they're still a little scared of that stuff, but coming and getting pats and that sort of thing. So
Cool.
yeah, new cats to enjoy and make friends with, because as you know, cats don't immediately make friends with you. So it's always a bit of a...
Once you feed them a few times, you can, well, yeah, cats are funny, aren't they? You can, Balin's partner wants a cat.
Yeah.
And because she loves our cats. And I'm like, well, the thing with cats is they can either be quite diabolical or they can be lovely.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee on the cat front. I think dogs are more, definitely more of a guarantee that you'll get.
They're like unconditional love guaranteed for sure.
Whereas, cats can just be absolute savages, or like my cats aren't like your typical cats. Like they love going on walks and they'll follow you everywhere. But they don't meow at you for food. They just sit at their bowl and they'll just wait. They're very patient. And then my daughters can basically do anything to them and they just won't scratch them or anything like that. They're pretty much the perfect cats. They're kind of like dogs in cat form. So it's a weird one. But anyway, I've had Matt, for example, that was talking about with the BMW. He had a childhood cat, and it was a piece of work. Nastiest thing. Basically, it existed, but nobody could go near it.
Huh, that's weird.
Yeah, it was weird. So yeah, that was...
Well, anyway, that's why you go and get a rescue pet, so you can get the full psychological profile and you can avoid those ones. Because
I want the evil genius.
Well, our previous cat was very friendly. Our inside white cat was, again, very similar to your cats, kind of just would follow you around and very affectionate to people and things like that.
Used to meow at me all the time.
Yeah, used to meow. Like we've had guests stay in our guest room and the cat would just go and sleep on the bed with them, like no problems. Probably because it was, cat gets older, gets used to humans and that sort of thing. But Yeah, cats can be a bit unpredictable, but if you get a cat that's a kitten, then it's just could be anything, and so that's why we've tended to go with the full psychological profiling system, which has worked for us in the past. But yeah,
I
actually,
can't wait till you have kids.
our outside cat was we took off someone else, but they had it as a kitten, and that was just like a lotto sort of thing. There's just sort of pass on from some family to another family situation, but. Yeah, so having cats is great, especially if you get friendly ones because they'll just come and be your friend and follow you around the house and stuff like that. So it's always a bit of fun. And if you get two cats that are friends and have bonded in the shelter, then they just run around and play with each other and have a really good time. So
I think with cats, having two of them is the way to go. I think, socially, I don't know, they just work a lot better than solo cats, I think. I mean, that's, what the hell do I know about cats? But whenever we've had two cats, it's gone well. One cat can be a bit funny.
Yeah, I think with one cat, there's always that risk of like they can just get used to the solo life. Like if you're not at home all the time, then they can get very used to sort of not having people around, and so they just like being by themselves. But if there's two, then they can have a bit of fun at times when we're not around.
I'm not sure. I'm sure there's some answer because I've seen it quite a few times. But
yep.
Anyway.
Well, I'm not a cat expert, so I've got no idea. I've just had cats and like friendly ones and got two new cats now. So
that's the level of my expertise as well.
So yeah, fun stuff. That'll pretty much do it for this episode. Again, managed to talk for a while, which is always nice. We'll be back next week, hopefully, if everything goes well, to talk about more stuff. And yeah, we got the podcast feed, the audio version. We got the Hardware Unboxed podcast on YouTube. We've now apparently got more social media profiles since I made a Blue Sky account. So follow us there. Follow us on Threads. Follow us on Facebook. We never post anything there, but we have an account. So I don't know. Click whatever. I haven't been on Facebook for so long. I can't even tell you what the button is. It follow or subscribe? I don't even know.
I'm trying to work out why you're directing people to places where we will never respond to them. Do you hate them that much?
Well, there's a chance that I'll respond to them on Blue Sky. If it's on Facebook, man, there's no chance. Like, I'm not planning on clicking Facebook anytime soon.
I thought the reason you liked Blue Sky was because no one talked to you there.
Yeah, well, maybe. We'll see. So, yeah, that's it for this podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.